How about Nicolas Jackson and his future at Chelsea? Because it looks increasingly uncertain, doesn't it? He was left out of Chelsea's pre-season friendly with AC Milan yesterday, which he ended up winning comfortably. His valuation in any potential deal would be in line with fees paid for strikers in the current market. So that basically says Chelsea are looking at the likes of Ekitike and Gyökeres, etc., and they want that kind of money. So they've got quite a high price tag on him. First of all, Kevin, in terms of the places where he could go, AC Milan, Juventus and Bayern Munich have all shown interest. We've just talked about AC Milan and their interest in Rasmus Højlund. So which of those three sides do you think is the most likely destination for him, if any?
I think the problem is modern football finance dictates that those clubs, even though they're giants of European football, maybe can't afford him or wouldn't want to commit that much finance to bringing him in. We've talked about Milan looking at Vlahovic, looking at Højlund. That feels more realistic. Juventus are pushing hard for Rondal Colomouani, who was there on loan from PSG last season and did very well. They'd like to sign him on a permanent basis. I can't see them coming up with that kind of cash to bring in Nicolas Jackson. It was interesting that he was linked with Bayern because what they don't have is cover for Harry Kane. It looks as though Kingsley Coman's going to move on that left-hand side if they were to put him out there, but naturally he'd want to play as a striker. But is that a great landing spot for him if Harry Kane is a lock for that number 9 role? So that's the problem Chelsea might have. There'll be lots of clubs who are interested, but how many of them can realistically afford him? And I think what we're seeing as well is a certain brutality with Chelsea, in the sense that ruthlessness, if you like. He made that mistake against Flamengo and got sent off. He was sent off in that big game against Newcastle as well. And your fortunes can change pretty quickly. And suddenly they brought in Liam Delap, they brought in Joao Pedro, and he's on the outside looking in. So it's a tough situation for him, but also how many takers will there be at that level of finance?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if Chelsea are keen to get Jackson out the door, are they going to have to drop that valuation significantly?
I mean, first of all, Kevin's spot on. Life hits you fast. I mean, Nicolas Jackson signed a contract extension last season, which means his contract still has 8 years left on it. But as you mentioned, Matt, Chelsea are looking at an evaluation of strikers, or what strikers have gone for in this market, so north of around £60 million, essentially, and more than that. And I think they're probably also looking at what they sold Noni Madueke for. Yes, slightly different positions, but Jackson's numbers slightly better than Madueke with his 10 goals, 5 assists. So, as Kevin said, it really is trying to look at the market for him and where he goes. I mean, the obvious link, and there's not to say there's anything in that just yet, but would be, depending on Newcastle and what happens with Alexander Isak, could Nicolas Jackson make sense there in terms of him having Premier League experience? I actually also thought, although he did miss some clear-cut chances and a bit of a temperament issue, I thought overall he had a positive season. It was better than his first. And I think people forget he's still relatively young in terms of top-tier league experience. So this is a player still who's going to get better and still has a lot of potential to offer.
All right, let's move this on to Jackson. Was again absent from Chelsea's squad for their pre-season friendly against AC Milan. Jackson has told Chelsea that he wants to consider his options to play for another club. Chelsea, shall we? Who we have already spoken a bit about, but I want to go back to them because we know they're interested in signing Xavi Simons. The question is, Kevin, how important is Christopher Nkunku's future in this deal, do you think?
I think it is important. Chelsea quite clearly want to move him on. I think it's a real shame the way it's worked out for Nkunku. I was very positive about it when they first signed him. He started well in that first pre-season, but he was injured almost as soon as he arrived, wasn't he? And he never really recovered from that. But we're talking about a player that has been joint top scorer in the Bundesliga. I know people will say Bundesliga tax and all of that, but he's a genuinely excellent footballer. He can play in multiple positions. Now, Bayern, I think, are still interested in him because the guy they really want is a guy that we talked about last week on the show, Nick Woltemade, who's this big, tall, unusual striker who can play 10 as well. He's the dream signing, I think, in that 10 area to beef up 10 and 9. But Stuttgart are digging their heels in. and saying we don't want to let him go unless you're going to pay much more money. We're not going to let him go. And Nkunku's a player they very much like. Bayern, they liked him when he was at Leipzig. They've been linked with him since he got to Chelsea pretty much. So that's something they're considering. It's interesting, there've been reports in Germany about whether he'd go back to Leipzig. Does he fit into the wage structure now? That's the issue, because obviously that's a consideration having gone to the Premier League. So they've got to think very carefully about that. Would he want to go back to Leipzig? He very much enjoyed his time there. But it seems as though Chelsea do want to shift players on before committing to bringing Xavi in.
But where would Simons fit into this Chelsea 11? Is best place Palmer's position, isn't it?
Well, he naturally plays that kind of 10, but he drifts off to the left. If you look at his kind of heat maps in games, he naturally drifts off to that left-hand side. He could play on the left, but they've signed Jamie Gittins there as a more traditional winger on that side. He's obviously somebody that can back up Cole Palmer as well. But is he going to have the same position, the same issue that Nkunku has had? That Nkunku's got real quality players ahead of him. And Dan's already mentioned it with the World Cup year. Can Xavi afford to not be a regular starter somewhere? So I'm sure he'd back himself, but it's an interesting question.
The good problem for Chelsea and Enzo Maresca is they will have a lot of games in terms of the Champions League, Carabao Cup, although I'm sure Xavi won't be wanting to play in that competition that much in terms of the Carabao Cup. But in terms of, he'll be, of course, wanting to break in. If he does join Chelsea, playing in the Premier League every week, the Champions League, of course. I think it's very interesting, though, just to rewind a little bit, you talk about Christopher Nkunku. I mean, it's really funny how football changes in a short space of time, because that first summer in the summer series, Nicolas Jackson and Nkunku, Chelsea fans were getting extremely excited about that pre-season. And, Nkunku has essentially just not played a lot of football for 2 years now. And Nicolas Jackson's future, as we spoke about, is in real doubt. So it's just very interesting how football changes so much.
I think the interesting thing about Nkunku in terms of this wage issue, it's exactly what Dan's been talking about with this World Cup year thing. And Nkunku, if you remember, when we were talking about him going to Chelsea, he was very much part of that French setup, and he had a good chance of maybe breaking in on a regular basis. If he's going to be part of that squad in North America next summer, he's going to have to be a regular somewhere. So it's either going to be competing with players at Bayern for various spots, or he'd be an absolute top player at Leipzig, because I think they're crying out for somebody like him. So is he going to be willing to make some compromises to get regular football, get back in that window for France? It'll be an interesting decision for him to make. I think a few players have got those decisions to make this year.
It's Monday, and the transfer market is buzzing with big moves, surprise approaches, and some major names linked with the exit door. Here's your Sport Lab news roundup. Tottenham have made an approach to Manchester City for winger Savinho. AC Milan are in talks with Manchester United over signing Rasmus Højlund. This comes just days after United sealed the deal for Benjamin Sesko. Chelsea believe they can land Alejandro Garnacho for significantly less than United's £50 million valuation, while Nicolas Jackson has told the Blues he's open to a move away. He wasn't even in the squad for Sunday's friendly. Malik Thior is undergoing his Newcastle medical today after arriving from Milan last night. Crystal Palace chairman Steve Parish says the club may have to consider selling captain Mark Guehi this summer. Talks continue over Yoane Wissa's Brentford future amid interest from Newcastle, and the Bees have also opened initial discussions with Bournemouth for Dango Ouattara. And finally, Leeds and West Ham are eyeing a move for Liverpool winger Ben Doak. Plenty of big stories this Monday. Which move would shake things up the most? Let us know in the comments, and stay locked on Sport Lab for all your transfer updates.